All right. So, hello everybody. It's another beautiful Wednesday. It's a little dreary here in Pennsylvania, but I'm excited for the conversation that we're going to have today and having some valued guests on the webinar and live sessions. So today we're going to talk about FSMA, so FSMA, which is dealing with, is your business prepared for the new food safety legislation? And to help drive that home is really going to be two individuals that know this space very well, dealing with Kurt and Jonathan from TrackVision AI. And of course, I'll let them introduce themselves and who they are and what they do. So go ahead, gentlemen, whoever would like to go first.
I'll be happy to jump in. Thanks, Jim. It's great to be here. And again, appreciate the opportunity to talk about this very, very important topic. So my name is Kurt Schacker, and along with Jonathan, I'm one of the co-founders of TrackVision AI. We are a supply chain traceability company that we started going on about a year and a half ago now. And we've built a platform that is based entirely and natively on GS1 standards. We believe that that is the correct way to implement supply chain systems for lots of good reasons that we might have a chance to talk about. But those GS1 standards are important also in the sense that they are referred to quite a bit in the topic that we'll be discussing today, FSMA 204. There are strong recommendations through industry that basing your FSMA compliance solution on GS1 standards has some important advantages, and so that's what we're about. At TrackVision.
Thanks, Kurt. I'll introduce myself as well. Hi, everyone. My name is Jonathan Ling. I'm the head of product and another co-founder at TrackVision AI. I have a long background history creating supply chain systems and doing systems integration, but I have a very, very deep passion in applying open data standards to problems such as regulatory compliance and the data exchange that comes along with that. So I'm super excited to talk to Jim and have this discussion today.
Awesome. So one of the big things that people need to understand is that the U.S. government is making this mandate, and this mandate is really hitting a lot of different companies. And when I say a lot, we're essentially talking about 300 to 400,000 businesses across the U.S. as soon as January 2026. And that's really not that far away. So if you really think about things, are you ready? Are you prepared? So what we're going to do is we're going to jump into things being presented with Jonathan and Kurt, of course, assisting. And we're going to go through a presentation just to explain what FSMA 204 is.
Yeah, so shall we jump into that, Jim?
Sure, let's go for it.
Yeah, so I think for starters, the handle you'll typically hear is people will say FSMA 204. It does go by a longer name called the Requirements for Additional Traceability Records for Certain Foods. And it, as you indicated, is indeed a legislation that is existing in the United States. It is enforced by the FDA, and it becomes effective specifically on January 20th of 2026. It is a legislation which imposes record-keeping requirements on businesses that are involved in the production, handling, shipping, receiving, processing of certain types of foods. Those foods are indicated on what the FDA calls a food traceability list, but they are the kinds of foods that would typically carry foodborne illnesses. And so we're talking about, leafy greens and vegetables, seafood, nut butters, cheeses, and so forth. And so, what the FDA is attempting to do is to set up a record-keeping system so that they can respond more quickly, more efficiently to outbreaks of foodborne illnesses. If you're, sort of read the newspaper at all, you'll be aware that we are seeing food recalls happening all the time. I think I looked at the FDA site today. There have been 178 recalls that have been issued this year, 16 in the month of September. And the state of affairs to date has been fairly deplorable. It is notoriously difficult when somebody gets sick from eating one of these types of foods to actually track down what was the original source of that food. And if you can't track down where that food came from, then it's very difficult to understand where that food has ended up in the supply chain. And obviously, this impacts greatly food safety, which is what we're all trying to do a better job of. And so the FDA will be enforcing this legislation as of January 2026, which requires businesses involved in those activities around these groups of food to keep records that are very clearly spelled out. And we'll probably get into what those records are and what they mean and so forth, and be able to make those records available to the FDA upon request, which would obviously happen in an outbreak type of situation. Companies will have 24 hours to respond to a record request by the FDA. And it's quite serious if you are unable to do so, or even unable to demonstrate that you're able to comply with the legislation. The FDA, in an extreme case, can actually shut down your business operations. And so it would be advisable to take it quite seriously. And as you said, when we look at the breadth of the companies involved, the estimates are somewhere between 300,000 and 400,000 organizations in North America are affected by the legislation.
So when we're looking at that, you start to think of, like, it gets the brain going, and you're thinking of the local farmer, and you're thinking of where you go, like, where are you picking up your products, where you're going to the grocery store, or maybe you're going straight to the farmer, or you're going to get your cheeses, and you're going to get all these different things, and you're going, okay, well, imagine we have a natural disaster that just went on with Helene, and all those products and all of those things sitting in a warehouse, and the electricity goes off. And now you have a warehouse filled with spoiled goods. Well, how do you get that indicated out to everybody so that everybody knows that product's not moving? And that's just one thing that I'm thinking of when my mind leads into it.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, I think, the challenge here, I think, is somewhat symptomatic of the larger problem. And I sort of inferred this when we talked about why we started TrackVision, is that supply chains in general are notoriously isolated from each other. Sometimes people talk about the data being in silos. And what that really means is that companies have a very difficult time sharing data. And that's because there are not, so far, a widely proliferated set of acceptable global standards that people can build these databases on and use to collect supply chain event information. So when you don't have interoperability built into the foundation of the system, sharing is very difficult. And of course, what is supply chain traceability? It's all about data sharing between trading partners up and down the supply chain. And this is why we're so passionate about standards, because that's really the way that you get at that problem. It's very similar to the internet that we all use every day. The reason it works so well as it does is because you have full interoperability, and the reason you have that is because everybody who is involved in the internet economy commits to using a set of standards that we've all agreed upon, right? So we're not there with supply chains, and that's really the bigger issue. But here, we're not trying to boil the ocean. I mean, we have legislation that has been issued by Congress, enforceable by the FDA, imposing a very specific set of requirements on companies. And there's no alternative. You can't sit back and sort of watch on the sidelines unless you're willing to run the risk that the FDA could shut your business down. So as you said in the beginning, you might say January 2026 seems like a long ways off, but I mean, that's the day that you have to be compliant. So that means you got to be thinking hard about it now, putting your plans in place and really figuring out what your execution strategy is going to be so that you are compliant, presumably or hopefully well in advance of the deadline.
Yeah, because you don't want your business to be shut down. I mean, it's an extreme, but it's definitely something that can occur. And in the EDI world, we see a lot of people that don't plan. They're and I'm not trying to knock, and I know we all do it. As a business owner, I get lost in the weeds sometimes, and I forget about certain things that really I shouldn't be forgetting about. And if you're one of these organizations, you should not be forgetting about this. Like, this should not be 2 months before before the deadline going, hey, how do I become compliant?
Not at all. I think you're running a huge risk if you do that. And not only that, I think the other thing to acknowledge here is the breadth of companies. Everybody knows about the grocery stores and the big food producers, the big brands that you go by every day. But a lot of food in this country is produced by small farms, small producers who don't have big IT departments and big budgets, and probably do a lot of record keeping by hand, or maybe typing some things into spreadsheets, whatever. And none of those things is unacceptable on its own. But there is certainly a commitment to compliance that's required. And one has to be very thoughtful about the strategy that they're going to undertake. Even if you're a small farm, I think there's something like a limit of about, I think it's, if I recall correctly, $50,000 in revenue. If you have less than that, then you're excused from the legislation. But that's not very many companies, right? And so everybody else has to comply. And so big or small, whatever part of the food chain you're participating in, you really have to take this legislation very seriously.
Yeah, it's definitely not something that you want to forget about, and it's definitely not, even if I was in moving anything in the food industry, I don't care what it is, I would be looking into this. If I'm dealing with anything that's consumable, I would be looking into this, because the wines, the orange juice, the cheeses, like all of those things, just to see, am I on that list? Do I need to be compliant? If I do, then I need to find who can help me be compliant, who studies this and is the subject matter expert in this. And that's where we, of course, this is where we found each other's companies, because Jonathan was looking for somebody that knows about FSMA. And I'm just trying to give the folks a little bit of background. And what did he find? He found EDI Support LLC because of talking about FSMA and talking about things that not a lot of people talk about, but a lot of businesses need to know about.
Yeah, indeed. And I think we've probably gotten people's attention by now. And I think we should probably shift and talk more about how does one comply, because it shouldn't come across as scary. You have to take it seriously, but it's doable. It's achievable, but you just have to have a plan. You have to execute to that plan. There are some recommended strategies by GS1, the ecosystem. We have a point of view, other service providers, solution providers out there. And so, approaches to achieving compliant are there. And so, this is not some far-flung thing that, that companies will never get to. We can do this, and we should definitely talk about how. One thing before maybe jumping into that, though, there's an interesting phenomenon that I also see happening, or we also see happening, which is, even though the requirements only extend to food items that are on the food traceability list, we're in fact starting to see a number of companies come out and say, you know what, if I'm going to achieve compliance with this legislation, I might as well just do it for everything, all the food that I deal with. Because in fact, if you think about it, it wouldn't be very efficient to have two different systems. So if you're going to make the effort, why not apply that effort across the board? And especially because the whole idea of this in the end is food safety. So just because something isn't on the FTL doesn't mean you don't want to create a safe food chain. So I was just reading, for example, the notice that Walmart has put out to its entire food supply chain. And what they are directing is that all food suppliers to Walmart will achieve FSMA compliance if they want to sell food to Walmart, and all the way down to pet food, which is not on the FTL by a long shot. So now they're gonna fit in. So by January 26th, it'll be the providers of food or the handlers of food on the food traceability list. But anybody providing any type of food, selling any type of food into the Walmart network will be required to comply with the legislation. So I think that's indicative of just the impact that this is going to have. So when we say 300 or 400,000, I mean, we're talking about companies who handle the types of foods that are on the FDL, but in practical matters, it may actually be a much larger number of companies based on that trend that we're seeing by Walmart. And we've heard this not just at Walmart, but other grocery retailers as well. But maybe we ought to shift gears and talk a little bit more about the requirements more specifically, because we don't want to scare people. We want everybody to achieve compliance. And so I think painting a picture of how they can get there is probably super important to do.
Yeah, no, definitely. And again, it's the world that we live in. If you really think of it, you have to break it down to the world that we live in, and you have to look at it from a personal standpoint. Tracking things and knowing where things are at and where they originate from and all of those things is what we do now. We've all become accustomed to, and I hate to say it, the Amazon world, but it is what it is. You know, everybody wants to know, where's my product, where's my package, who's it coming from, all of these things. So definitely in the requirements, you can get into those details.
Yeah. So maybe Jonathan, I'll have you walk through that.
Yeah, so we can talk about, as a business, what are the core requirements you will need to fulfill as part of this legislation. So the first thing, if you're putting products out into the world, you're going to need to assign what's known as a traceability lot code to those batches or lots of products, whether you're harvesting or you're packing or you're transforming, processing food. So you're taking raw input ingredients and producing a new output product. The first thing you need to do is assign traceability lot codes. The second thing you'll need to worry about is storing and sharing what the FDA calls critical tracking events. And we'll go through them in a second. And each of those events has a definition of what kind of information needs to be stored within that event. So the kind of events we're going to be talking about is things like growing, packing, shipping, receiving. So the EDI audience will start to immediately understand we're going to be talking about shipping and receiving a lot today. And that's where EDI can really help the businesses exchange the data that you need to. To round out on the high-level requirements, the third thing you need to be able to do is you need to be prepared to share data in an electronic format with the FDA upon request. And you have 24 hours to comply with that request. And the data that you give back needs to be electronic. And the minimum the minimum form that it needs to take is what the FDA calls a sortable spreadsheet. So the spreadsheet needs to be structured, sortable, filterable in a spreadsheet that can be electronically handed over to the FDA within 24 hours of receiving that request. The final thing you might need to worry about is creating and maintaining what's known as a traceability plan, which is simply a document which describes how you're going to achieve compliance with the above requirements, right? So if we dive a little bit deeper into critical tracking events, the critical tracking events you will need to store and exchange depend on what you're doing in the supply chain. So a farm that's just growing food might need to record the harvesting KDE. And maybe if you're initially cooling the food, you might need to record a cooling CTE with certain key data elements within. Then there's sort of usually an initial packing stage of the raw agricultural commodity. As it goes out into the broader supply chain, that needs to be recorded. And then whoever's shipping and receiving need to record data as well. And not just record data, but you also need to share data. So when we drill into the requirements that the FDA have stipulated, they say whenever you ship something, you need to send to the target party not electronic records, but records that correspond to what you shipped and where the original source of all the batches in that shipment was actually from. So going back to Jim's point earlier, it's not just complying with the FDA by January, it's your business partners are going to be relying on you to do your part And if you don't, they're going to be upset. So you're seeing like the Krogers and the Walmart saying, I want to see compliance within, at least 6 months in advance of that date to make sure everything's working. Because if the suppliers don't do don't fulfill their requirements, then the big guys won't be able to fulfill their requirements, and they're not going to tolerate that, right? So
Well, and if you think about it, Jonathan, so imagine if you're the Kroger, the Albertsons, whoever of the worlds, and you have somebody that's not putting that investment in and that time in of being compliant, and now it's putting you at risk. What they're going to do is they may value your products more, or it may have a better price point, or whatever it may be. But guess what? Now they might move to somebody else that is compliant, that does have a product, and maybe that product is a little bit more. But in the end, they know they're not going to lose that product, whether it's apples or oranges or whatever it may be. That's a product that they're purchasing, and that's a real life scenario that could occur.
You've hit the nail on the head. They actually say this in the frequently asked questions on the Walmart site. Like, what happens if you don't comply? Termination of commercial relationships is absolutely an outcome, as well as the FDA enforcement risk as well. So it's quite serious.
Yep.
So so I guess the next thing to talk about would be, well, how do you practically prepare for this legislation? So we think that the traceability plan that you have to create anyway is really actually a good vehicle to start thinking about how to comply with this legislation. And to take that to one level deeper, you can think about a traceability plan in terms of data. And after all, this legislation really is all about data. You're trying to model in digital or physical data records what really happened in the physical supply chain, right? So if I'm a business in the middle here, and I'm a processor, I'm a manufacturer, I take raw ingredients, I add value to them. For example, maybe I'm a manufacturer of packed salads. So I take raw tomato, raw leafy greens, I cut them up, combine them together, and I create packed salads. As a business, I have to think about this problem from a few different angles. One is, how am I going to get that data from my suppliers? I'm going to have to think, well, what are all the suppliers that I get that are on that food traceability list, and how are those classes of product identified? Are they using some standards from GS1, for example, that says, okay, this is this class of product which is unique from all these other classes of product, and these are some structured attributes for those products that describe that product, because that's the kind of things that the FDA is going to ask you for. They're going to say, well, what were the key data elements of the product that you've got from your supplier, and so on. So there's a whole bunch of requirements there. Labeling is something you're going to need to think about. What kind of labels are they going to be putting onto the products that they send you? Perhaps, as we see Kroger and Walmart do, you're going to push some requirements onto your suppliers saying, we expect you to use these GS1 labels with these attributes on them, so that we can use barcode scanning and reduce physical labor of data entry and increase accuracy and so on. And finally, there's always going to be a digital record exchange from your suppliers. They need to tell you, for example, what was the source of each traceability lot that was sent to you. How are you going to get that? Are you going to just get it in email? What will that do to your labor costs? Well, obviously you want to use a more scalable mechanism such as EDI or the new EPSIS standard to electronically ingest records from your business partners and store it in your own systems. Now you can keep thinking around the wheel here. You can think, well, now it comes to my operations. How am I going to assign my traceability lot codes? How am I going to label my products? How am I going to store all the data, for example, transformation events, which map input ingredients to output products that I'm manufacturing? How am I going to store that in a scalable way so that when the FDA come knocking, I can get the data out that I need and present it to them in a compliant way? And then we need to think about our commitments and our responsibilities with our own customers. So my B2B customers, how am I going to get the data to them? How am I going to make sure my products are labeled in a way that's compliant with what they need? And I mean, the final thing to talk about is the FDA itself. If the FDA come knocking and say, I need information on all your records for this certain batch on this certain day for these certain critical tracking event types, how are you going to get that if you're dealing with a large volume of records? Where's my traceability traceability plan going to be stored? How am I going to track the versions over time, which is another requirement that the FDA stipulates. So I quite like this framework. It sort of splits the world into thinking about inputs, your own operations, outputs, and the FDA's requirements. It's a good vehicle that we're using with our customers to help them through their traceability journey.
So when you're looking at these things, and you're looking at some of these things are already in place for a lot of companies. So, and what I say by that is some companies may already have EPSIS that's already in place with the GS1s and labeling and the ASN, and it may just be a piece of data or a couple pieces of data needed to be added into your EDI or into your process. So again, people don't, you have to take on individuals that understand the requirements, understand the data that's needed, and understand that can look at your current system that's in place and say, hey, you just need these couple pieces to be added to the process to be in compliance. And then on the back end, have an organization like TrackVision AI to say, hey, listen, we already have the logging. We already have the compliancy things that we know need to be done that have to be available if they ask you for it. If the legislation and government comes for you and they come knocking and they say, hey, do you have this information? It's here. You don't have to build out a whole system. You have a platform that's there and ready to help you and assist you, is the way that I look at it.
No, it's a really good point. I mean, people aren't starting from scratch here with no systems. Yeah. And so this is for most companies, probably an additive requirement. A new business process that they have to overlay into their existing operations. And in that sense, it shouldn't be overly onerous. Again, I talked about some of the small producers, and so perhaps it's a bigger step forward to them. But again, it doesn't have to be terribly complex or even that costly. But what it does need to be is complete and very thorough. You can't cut corners. Because that's where you're going to get caught out. One of the things I think is interesting, and we'll talk about how standards help with all of this as well. But the FDA gives you 24 hours to respond to requests, and obviously, what they're going to do with that is they're going to follow a breadcrumb trail down the line, right? That's the whole point of that. So if there's 7 hops in the supply chain, I suppose it could take as long as 7 days for the FDA to eventually identify the original source of the offending material. But really, if you're keeping records the way you ought to be, it's curious why you would need 24 hours to respond, right? I mean, why shouldn't that just be a push button exercise? And that's one thing that we've certainly made an effort to implement in our system. So if you're using TrackVision to support your record keeping requirements for FSMA 204, it's literally just a download button and out comes your spreadsheet. And, you could literally reply to the FDA and as long as it takes to download a spreadsheet and send it to them. But so it is a bit curious that sort of lag that they're allowing for. But in any case, again, it doesn't. I think your point is very well made. This does not have to be. We're not talking about greenfield operations where you have to throw everything out that you were doing and do things in a different way. They're practical people there, and they understand that that's not going to be reality for how things work and for businesses.
Yeah, they want to see everybody be successful. And again, the bottom line is seeing it from source to table or source to usage, however you want to look at it. And again, it could be different hops, it could be all of those different things. And as you're looking at the different standards of GS1 and all of those things, you have to have individuals that understand what those defining guides are and those standards are dealing with. But again, a lot of that's already been taken care of. If you've already been doing EDI and you're just needing to comply here, there may just be minor tweaks. So yeah, no, it's a lot of valuable information. It's a lot of good insight. It's a lot of things that people need to understand, that really this is to help you. This is to help you. This is to help us as a society, all of those things. So yeah, it's definitely a lot of good information. It's a lot of things that people need to understand and need to look into. So when you're looking at all of these things and you're going, oh my God, how can I just, reach out and give this off to Kurt, Jonathan, the TrackVision AI team, and allow them to do what they've put in place to help me. That's the way I look at it.
Yeah, I mean, the first step is education. And, I'd say the FDA and other organizations have done a really good job of describing the legislation and describing the requirements. But I think, there may still be an education gap. And how do you take that from, sort of what you have to do to how you do it? In fact, the FDA, when we've spoken to them about this, they're very careful in sort of the scope of what the legislation actually specifies. They can absolutely require and compel you to achieve the outcome that is described in the legislation, but they are not allowed to specify how you do that. And so that's the exercise left to the user, is how you're going to achieve compliance. And I think, so there's an educational process that has to happen. And certainly we're not the only ones doing this, but we're very happy to, I guess, invest in the, in food safety for America and the other things happening in the world as well, simply by providing free consultation to anybody who's interested in learning more about it. So anybody who is affected by the legislation can set up a meeting with us. We'll get on the line and we'll walk through, we'll take the concepts we described here, but we'll walk through them much more specifically. We'll show examples of exactly how it works. We'll show you how the sortable spreadsheet works and what you need to do depending on where you sit in the food supply chain, which of the critical tracking events that you're responsible for, which key data elements that you have to gather. And in fact, we're making our sortable spreadsheet template free to anybody. You can just go to our website and download it. So, I think education is the right place to start. And then, the next place is, okay, figure out what your traceability plan is, as Jonathan described, and start working on it. I would say best practice is probably to try to achieve compliance internally to your own sort of benchmarks, 3 to 6 months in advance of the deadline for the legislation, because then you're not, sweating bullets on January 19th.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's definitely those things where you don't want people to sit there and not feel as though they have somebody that they can reach out to. So being that we're of the similar nature where people can reach out, can deal with TrackVision AI and your team, just like EDI Support LLC, you can get in and see, as we're showing on the screen right now, how TrackVision helps, and have these conversations free of charge. Like, hey, we're educating you. We're giving you insight. We're doing all these things. It's free of charge. So if you really need to learn about it, set up a session. Just reach out.
Yeah. I think an interesting point to note is it almost feels like, while we've had hundreds and hundreds of customers we've worked with to help them through traceability journeys, whether it's batch level or even serialized level, everyone's a little bit different. Everyone's a little bit different in what existing business systems do they have? What existing business processes do they have? Is any of this in place, or are they starting a bit fresh? How big are they? How small are they? The kind of variables here are quite large. What we've tried to do with TrackVision AI is create a product that can neatly fit into whatever landscape the customer is currently operating in. If they need us to act as an operational system to help assign traceability lock codes, print out labels, do scanning, all of the best practices from an operational standpoint, we can be that system. If they're a much bigger company and they already have first-class ERPs, warehouse management systems, manufacturing execution systems, then it's an integration exercise. Get the data in from your proprietary systems into a standards compliant format in a central repository that's searchable, scalable, AI enabled, easy to use, right? And the other part to this is make sure that your data exchange with your business partners is following standards. So the EDI standards, this is where your company will find a lot of people as this countdown begins, suddenly knocking on their door and saying, hey, there's some changes to the ASN that Walmart and Kroger need because traceability lot code source now needs to be propagated down the supply chain. And we've never done that before. Yep. Help us, change the way we do our ASN so we can be compliant with these large customers. So there's going to be a lot of work to be done on legacy EDI implementations. From a TrackVision perspective, we want to be able to help customers just get their data in. We'll store it in a standards compliant format, and we'll help you exchange it to whatever suppliers or downstream customers need it, using these best practice electronic data exchange elements, EPSIS and EDI. And perhaps in a future session, we can talk in detail about how these standards are leveraged to support this legislation at scale.
Yeah, when we can get into, there's going to be further sessions of getting into explicit details and the crux of what we have going on here. This is really, the overview, getting people to understand that there are organizations out here that can help with this. And there are informational sessions like this to have people expand upon and say, hey, listen, we're not going to give you every rule in the legislation that's going on, but we're going to give you some pretty good knowledge and details as to what this looks like. So like you have here, booking a free hour consultation with you guys, I'm going to keep saying it, is because it makes sense. It's just like I do on the EDI world of you can book a free session with me. We're not charging you. It's conversations with people that have been doing this for decades and have an understanding as to all of the moving parts and really study these things. It just makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty clear there's no commitment to do anything else with TrackVision. But, I think in the sessions that we've been having, people always come away with something, some nuance about how something works, or they've got some open questions, which, we've been able to answer. So it's not a waste of time. And if whatever you end up doing as far as your implementation strategy with TrackVision or without TrackVision, it's time well spent, and we're happy to do it. This is what we do, and we like to talk about it. So I would say, don't hesitate if you're curious and you want to learn more. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, you want to talk with those people that are passionate, that have themselves personally invested in this, and are trying to be the leaders out there doing things that are different from what everybody else does. A lot of organizations want to offer up, sessions, but then they want to charge you for it, or the time is valuable. And again, putting this session together like this, where we're just having these open conversations for individuals to watch and hear and listen, it's a passion play for us. It's not really a money play. It's just getting the information out there.
Well, we're all in this together. We all, eat food last time I checked. And so we're all exposed to an unsafe food system. And, we've got a long ways to go. Let's face it, right? And so this is a step in the right direction. There's a vested interest on the part of all parties to improve the status quo. And if you're not doing it because it's the right thing to do, well, then do it because the FDA requires you to do it. And your business is at risk if you don't. So whatever your motivation, hopefully all of the above, you don't get to opt out of this is really the point. And so the sooner you start, the better.
Yep, I totally agree. So we've gone over our time allotments that we typically do, but one of the things that I always want to hit home is I'm not sure is how do people get a hold of you? How do people get a hold of TrackVision? How do people share looking into this information and understanding how do I get Kurt? How do I get Jonathan? Who do I reach out to? Where do I go?
Well, I think the easiest thing to do is to go to our website at trackvision.ai, and you'll see on just about every page that you can book a meeting with us. So pick your favorite page. We've got a very nice information page on FSMA 204. So you might want to start there by looking at a description, largely along the lines we've talked about here, but probably a little more detail about our solution for FSMA 204 compliance, and just literally put your name and email address into the contact page, and we'll reach back out to you, and we'll get a meeting set up. So very, very easy.
Awesome. And of course, I'm Jim Gonzalez with EDI Support LLC. We're going to have all the details in the comment or in the detail section, I should say, of all of our websites, how to get a hold of us, how to talk about these different things. Jonathan, Kurt, I truly am very happy to have you on these sessions. I look forward to more in-depth sessions where we can get into more granular details. So people, watch out. There's going to be more sessions where we'll get into the granular details just to give you more insight, because this isn't just a small little program that people are going to have to do. We have to get a little bit more granular. We have to get a little bit more explanative into the information that's really going to be necessary. But gentlemen, I hope you have a great rest of your Wednesdays. If you're like me here in Pennsylvania, it's a little dreary, but it is what it is. We're getting more into the autumn weather as the season goes on. So if you like pumpkin spice, hey, it's everywhere around here. But as always, I always value talking to different people, giving more insights. If you need us, like I said, all the details are going to be in there. Like, subscribe, comment. We didn't have any comments this session, but that's okay. So as we go further into these different things, we look for those comments and look for the insights, and anything that we can share as a team, please don't hesitate to reach out. So gentlemen, have a great day. Take care. And it was good doing a session with you.
Thanks so much, Jim.
Thanks for having us.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.